She didn't scream. She didn't fight back. She just stood there, surrounded by flashing lights and cold stares, accused of breaking a rule no one could clearly explain. In seconds, authority turned into aggression, and prejudice turned into power. Bystanders watched as a black woman was treated like a threat instead of a human being. But what happened next was something no one there could have prepared for. 5 seconds later, the balance of fear and control suddenly shifted. And what appeared beside her would change everything forever. Why did this moment silence everyone? If stories like this matter to you, if moments like this make you pause and think, take a second and stay with this one until the end. What happens next is important. Before that moment, her life was defined by quiet strength and routine. She was the kind of woman people passed every day without noticing, balancing work, responsibility, and dignity in a world that rarely made space for her. Mornings began early, evenings ended late, and every step she took was shaped by caution learned over a lifetime. She had learned how to stay calm, how to stay small, and how to avoid attention that could turn dangerous without warning. That day felt no different at first. The air was heavy, the place was public, familiar enough to feel safe. She wasn't rushing. She wasn't hiding. She was simply existing, carrying the weight of another long day behind her. What she didn't realize was how closely she was being watched, or how quickly ordinary movement could be twisted into suspicion. Power has a way of showing itself without explanation. It doesn't ask questions. It doesn't wait for clarity. And for people who look like her, it often arrives already convinced. The environment around her began to shift in ways that were subtle but unmistakable. Eyes lingered too long. Movement slowed. Judgment was formed before facts ever could. She had lived her whole life knowing moments like this were possible, but knowing doesn't make you prepared when it finally happens. Somewhere beneath the surface of that ordinary day, tension was building. Control was about to be tested. And the space she stood in was about to become a place where fear, authority, and something entirely unexpected would collide. The moment authority closed in, the air around her changed. What had been an ordinary space suddenly felt smaller, tighter, as if invisible walls were pressing inward. Movements were questioned without words. Intent was assumed without evidence. Every shift of her body was watched as though it confirmed a story already written about her before she ever arrived. Her calm became suspicious. Her stillness became defiance. The very act of existing was treated as provocation. Hands that were meant to protect now controlled the space around her, guiding, restricting, deciding. The crowd nearby sensed it too. Some slowed down. Others looked away. Fear has a way of spreading silently when power is misused in public. If you've ever seen something like this happen, or felt this tension yourself, let me know in the comments. Stories like this are shared by more people than we realize. She tried to ground herself, reminding her body not to react, not to escalate, and not to give them anything they could twist. But restraint did not soften the situation. It hardened it. The imbalance became clearer with every passing second. Authority leaned in. Judgment pressed closer. And the reason for it all remained frustratingly vague, as though the rule she had broken existed only in their minds. Her surroundings blurred as tension rose. The sound of movement behind her, the weight of eyes on her back, the sudden awareness that she was no longer in control of where this moment was heading. She had seen stories like this before. She had felt their endings echo through her community for years. The fear wasn't loud, but it was sharp, cutting through her thoughts with precision. Time stretched unnaturally. Each second carried more pressure than the last. The crowd's energy shifted from curiosity to discomfort. Something was clearly wrong, and everyone could feel it, yet no one stepped forward. The system was unfolding exactly as it always did, efficiently and without hesitation. Then came the push that changed everything. It wasn't dramatic at first. Just enough force to remind her who held power. Enough to erase any remaining illusion of fairness. Her footing faltered. Balance slipped. And in that instant, control was no longer theoretical. It was physical. Real. Dangerous. If you're still watching, stay with this moment. What happens next is where everything turns. The space around her erupted into motion. Fear surged through the crowd as the situation crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. What began as scrutiny had turned into force. What began as authority had become aggression. And still, there was no explanation, no justification that made sense. As panic tightened its grip, something else shifted beneath the surface. A presence. A tension unlike the one before. The air felt charged, as though the moment itself was holding its breath. People sensed it without understanding why. The officers hesitated, just slightly, as if reacting to something they couldn't see. 5 seconds passed. And in those 5 seconds, the balance of power began to change. The moment stretched beyond reason. Fear pressed in from every direction, thick and suffocating, as the line between authority and danger disappeared completely. Her body reacted before her thoughts could catch up, heart racing, muscles tight, every instinct screaming that this was the point of no return. This was the moment so many stories ended badly. This was the moment she had been taught to survive at all costs. Then the air shifted. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't imagined. A sudden stillness cut through the chaos, sharp enough to silence the crowd and freeze movement mid-step. The presence that emerged beside her felt ancient, deliberate, and impossibly calm. Massive. Unmistakable. A wolf stood there, its form steady and unflinching, eyes locked forward with a quiet authority that demanded attention without needing force. Everything stopped. Fear changed direction. The power that had pressed down on her moments earlier hesitated, uncertain for the first time. The wolf did not lunge. It did not snarl. It simply stood between her and harm, a living boundary that refused to be crossed. Its presence alone rewrote the rules of the moment. The crowd gasped as realization spread. Phones lifted. Breath caught. No one understood how it was possible, but everyone understood what it meant. The woman who had been treated as disposable was no longer alone. The imbalance of power had shifted, not through violence, but through something deeper, protection, dignity, and an undeniable warning. Her fear began to loosen its grip. Not because the danger had vanished, but because something had arrived that would not allow injustice to go unanswered. The wolf's eyes never left the threat before it, steady and patient, as if daring the world to make its next move. And in that suspended moment, one truth became impossible to ignore. This was no longer just about her survival. It was about what happens when power is challenged by something it cannot control. The moment did not end with applause or celebration. It ended with silence. The kind of silence that follows when people realize they have just witnessed something they cannot explain away. The tension slowly eased, movement returned, and the world resumed its rhythm, but nothing felt the same. The woman remained standing, shaken but intact, aware that she had crossed through something irreversible. She walked away carrying more than relief. She carried the weight of being seen, of surviving a moment that so many others did not. The fear did not vanish. It settled deeper, reshaped by memory. But alongside it grew something else, a quiet certainty that her life, her dignity, and her existence were never the problem. The problem was a system that treated her as one. What happened to her was not an isolated incident. It was a reflection of a reality faced daily by countless people whose presence alone is questioned, whose safety is conditional, and whose humanity is too often ignored. The wolf did not erase that truth. It revealed it. It forced everyone watching to confront the imbalance they had grown used to accepting. In the days that followed, the moment spread beyond that place. People talked. People argued. People questioned what they had been taught to overlook. And while opinions clashed, one fact remained undeniable. Power had been challenged, and for a brief moment, injustice had been forced to pause. She returned to her life changed, not because she had been broken, but because she had seen how close the world comes to breaking people like her every single day. Survival should never require something extraordinary. Protection should never depend on intervention. And dignity should never be negotiable. If this story made you feel something, don't let it end here. Share it so others can feel it too. Leave a like if you believe these stories deserve to be heard. This story is not about a wolf. It is about what happens when silence is confronted, when fear is witnessed, and when humanity is finally acknowledged. And if you want to keep hearing stories like this, stories that challenge power, expose injustice, and give voice to what's often ignored, make sure you subscribe and stay with this channel. The question is not whether this could happen again. The question is how many times it already has, and what we choose to do the next time we see it.